Hi, Ann.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Greetings from Wisconsin, home of Scott Walker.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to talk about Scott Walker because you're a Scott Walker partisan.
No, I'm not a partisan at all. I'm an independent, and I'm a distance observer from my remote outpost in the north.
Just in case there's anybody in the universe who doesn't know who you are, let me introduce you as Ann Althouse, by the way, the famous blogger and law professor at the University of Wisconsin, where Scott Walker presides as governor.
Yeah.
I'm Robert Wright, and this is the Wright Show on Blogging Hits TV. Before we get to Scott Walker, and I wanted to say, you can't see this, and neither can our audio podcast listeners, but I have an actual Tom Brady football, inflated about as much as Tom likes his footballs inflated. You can't see them. It's maybe a little overinflated by his standards, actually. But anyway, we've been, living through this like major, I would say, almost crisis in American sports. I mean, this has been a big scandal, this Deflategate thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, especially as the last game before the Super Bowl, now we go into the Super Bowl with one team that we're supposed to think they're cheaters, they didn't belong there.
We already knew they were cheaters. We already knew that the Patriots were cheaters because they got the wrist slapped big time some years ago, 2007, I guess, for
Spygate.
Videotaping, the spying on the other team in some illicit manner. And we know I think we're pretty sure they cheated this time because did you see the press conference where Tom Brady got up and insisted that he hadn't done anything wrong?
I didn't watch the press conference. I read about it.
It was worth watching because it actually kind of elevated my opinion of him, which is not saying much because my opinion of him was I've never been a fan of his. And I remember at some point he was sending some kind of sympathetic vibes to George Bush in some sense, and that further lowered him in my esteem. But when I saw him lie and claim that he did not know about the deflating of these footballs, it actually raised my opinion of him. You know why?
Because he was a good liar?
No, because he was a bad liar. It was obvious. He was uncomfortable lying. I mean, and that, if you're going to be a liar, I would rather you be the kind of person who's uncomfortable lying. It suggests he's not a chronic liar. He was really uncomfortable lying.
Well, I think maybe he thought he was going to get away with it. So when he got caught, it was a little surprising. He doesn't. Do we agree, or is it right to think? I know he denied it, but and that you think he looked like he was lying, but he had to be involved. No one else could. I mean, the quarterbacks.
No, nobody's going to do that.
No one would.
Nobody's going to do that without the quarterbacks say so.
It's all. I mean, that's his responsibility. If the person in control of the balls were to whatever stick a needle in it and deflate it a little after the officials had looked at it, nobody would do that other than for the quarterback and at the behest of the quarterback. How could that possibly happen any other way? There's no other explanation.
Wouldn't. It's about as likely as that lady who sent the time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee email doing that without higher authorization, I would say.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's the Chris Christie Bridgegate scandal.
Oh, the Bridgegate. Oh, okay.
She wasn't freelancing either. I mean, maybe she got the order from Christie's chief of staff and not from Christie, but she definitely wasn't freelancing. In any event, you're right. This didn't happen.
Without Brady here's the distinction from Bridgegate. I think in Bridgegate, people around Christie might think that they know what they should do and then shield him from, and they do things that are to his advantage. But then he's not allowed to know, and they keep that distance. But they're in. And so that they might go ahead and do that on their own, specifically so that he wouldn't be involved. But it's not imaginable that the footballs would be deflated except because Brady, either did it himself or someone was doing it at his behest. Why would the ball boy, or whatever this person is called, tamper with what had already been set up? It seems like the preparation of the balls is a very meticulous thing. That is all about the quarterback. No one else would be about that. How else could it happen? And it was 11 of the 12 balls. How could that be an accident? How could that happen any other way?
Could not be. I think you'd make a great lawyer, Ann. I think you're onto something here. Now, here's my question to you as a lawyer. How grave an offense do you think this is? Leave aside the lying part, but like, messing with the footballs is that,
well, do you know?
I mean, remember, the idea to begin with is that quarterbacks do get to kind of, engineer the footballs to their liking within a certain range, within a 2-pound, some kind of, I don't know,
right,
range of inflation.
Yeah. And he likes the low end of that range. He likes the floor of that range.
He was way below the range.
Right, and then what it turned out. But do you know that Brady and I think Peyton Manning were behind the change in 2006 that put that rule in there in the first place? So there's some kind of ongoing. Why is there a rule on this subject? There doesn't have to be a rule about everything. And then I think, and from a legal standpoint, you might think, well, once we take the step of making a rule, then we have to follow the rule. We shouldn't be making a rule that we're not going to enforce. But of course, we're familiar in law generally with the fact that there are lots of rules that get violated all the time. So maybe a lot of people think, well, there are rules, there's maybe aspirational or they're for show, but do they really need to be followed? Maybe not. And obviously we all speed in the car, we cut corners in various ways, so we don't really believe in enforcing the law down to the last letter, and that seems to be a weird thing to want to do. I mean, that's a reason, in my view, that we shouldn't make so many laws, and we shouldn't make laws that we're not willing to enforce. But the thing about football is those rules are made for the sake of the reputation of football to maintain a relationship with the public. So if you're going to hold yourself out as those being the rules, and you're going to invoke those rules some of the time, we sort of develop a feeling that you're promising to enforce them all the time. Or at least if the other team complains, which is what happened this time. I think that it had been thought from earlier that they were underinflating the balls and that the Ravens had started this questioning of the balls, and that was passed on to the Colts. And the Colts were humiliated, so maybe that's why they... Yeah, it's been going on for a while.
I didn't realize that. I mean, you might say, well, why wasn't the NFL just handling the balls from the beginning? But apparently, I guess the original rule, which is that the home team handles all the footballs, provides all the footballs.
No, each team has its own set of balls, and then they have preferences about how to prepare them. No, I
understand that, but Ann, before the rule was changed to create that situation, as you said, at the behest of Tom Brady and others, the situation was that the home team provided them. That was what it was 20 years ago. The home team provided the footballs.
I can see the problem with that.
And had to keep them within a certain range.
Yeah.
And that's how it evolved into this, when they said, well, wait a second, shouldn't the away quarterback, the visiting quarterback have balls to his liking as well? So fine. That's how we got in this situation. I think the way to get out of it is to have the NFL just to provide all the balls. But there is a question of how grave an infraction is it? I mean, I think it's pretty grave. It's funny in baseball, you have a similar situation where there's a piece of equipment that the players themselves choose, the bats. Players provide their own bats. And there is something called corking a bat, which is you drill a hole in the bat, put cork in the middle, and then seal it.
Right.
And that, I think they may have put an end to that by x-raying bats routinely or something. But anyway, back when I recall it happening, the punishment was pretty minor. I don't know. They'd probably throw the guy out of the game and fine him or something. It was not considered epic, but I don't know. I just I'm for throwing the book at him.
There's this issue in football, and we talked about it last time we talked was back in September. I just looked it up, and we were talking about the problem with the the ball player who had punched his girlfriend in the elevator. Rick, what is his name?
Oh, right.
I forget his name.
Rice? Is that right? Is that Rice?
So
no.
And there was some discussion
He's
there about maintaining the reputation of football to keep it's a business, and they have to present it as a fair game in some sort of way. They've decided to do that, and they're trying to maintain the viewership. And I guess we're learning sort of how the public is receiving this. The idea that Brady is lying is bad. The idea that there are rules, but they're not being followed. The idea that this determines who got into the Super Bowl. Now the Super Bowl is such a big deal, and now it's kind of ruined because we feel that something illegitimate was done. It kind of pulls the rug out from under the big event of the Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, the Patriots won that game by so much that I don't think the footballs probably made that were decisive. Although if as you said, they were used in the previous game, that raises that question.
Well, I just know that the Green Bay Packers, my team here in Wisconsin, beat the Patriots during the season. And that final game with us and the Seahawks was as close as it could possibly be. And it was very thrilling. So I think that I put us in the Super Bowl. How's that for a remedy?
And as long as you're mentioning the Packers, I hadn't meant to do this, but I had been a Cowboys fan since I was a kid growing up in Texas. I watched on TV the original Ice Bowl and painfully remember Bart Starr's quarterback sneak. And I got to tell you, so you watched the Cowboys-Packers game, I assume. Are you a Packers fan?
Sure.
So you saw that Dez Bryant catch, right? That was ruled not a catch at the very end, the one that might well have won for the Cowboys.
Right, yeah, of course I saw that, and I watched it over and over, and that's an example of they have rules, and then they have to sell it to the public that that's a real rule, and that the rule was applied to the facts properly, and that was such an important play. You have to maintain the confidence of the viewers. Now, you as a Cowboy fan, maybe you aren't confident in how they called that. Am I correct?
I'm not. And I'm going to lead. I want to read you the rule. I'm sorry. I shouldn't get into this, but you're a lawyer, and I shouldn't be obsessed about it. But here's a rule that apparently, according to one of the articles, was the key rule. Mm-hmm. And listen to how this reads, okay? If a player goes to the ground in the act of catching a pass, he must maintain control of the ball. Here's a key phrase. Throughout the process of contacting the ground. Throughout the process of contacting the ground. Now, Ann, you work with words. You're a lawyer. You tell me, when does the process of contacting the ground end?
Well, any kind of written rule is then going to need to be interpreted, and then there's a...
I'll do it for you. I'll do it for you.
No, settle down a minute, Bob. I think that that the rule has been applied before, and there's some understanding of what that means. And I think that there was some discussion of making a continued football move, or there's like the idea of a football move and so forth. Anyway, it was explained on the TV show, I thought, very well. I'm not going to try to do it that well. I'm not looking at the picture. I thought it was done convincingly. But I can understand how someone who is a fan of the Cowboys and wanted the Cowboys to win or bet on the Cowboys or whatever, that they just can't believe it. They can't believe that that's right. And
or even somebody...
But you have to maintain the confidence of the public as you apply those rules, as the officials apply those rules. I think that they do that pretty well.
My final word.
But that's during the game. I think applying rules during the game and officiating properly and maintaining confidence in the honesty and the expertise of the officials is really important. And these things should be done during the game, so the penalties happen within the game. What's so bad about Deflategate is it comes out after the game. The result is already in. You can't have any remedy that relates to that game. And it needs to be in the game.
Okay. Let me just say one thing. This is the last thing I'll say about this.
Okay.
The process of frying an egg ends when the egg is fried. The process of contacting the ground ends when the ground is contacted. The moment he makes contact with the ground, that's my last word on the Des Bryant.
No, but you can't.
And for that matter, if you read the rest of that rule, it doesn't support the call either.
Well,
but I digress.
I thought it made sense. But I think when someone is going to the ground is playing a role in their seeming to get control of the ball. So you have a fine distinction that needs to be made in separating what the player is doing from the assistance he's getting from the ground. And there are things that happen at that point of going to the ground that allow experts to make a call about the role that the ground played. That's how I understand it. Something like that.
I would say that with powers of obfuscation like that, you should be a lawyer, Ann. But I digress. The Cowboys were robbed, but I digress. So have you said everything you want to say about
football?
Bridgegate?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Not everything, but most.
What remedy are you recommending? Nothing relating to who plays in the Super Bowl.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Technically, if it's an infraction that could have, there's a case for saying they forfeit the game in which they did it. But of course, that's not going to happen, especially since they won by 1,000,000 points.
And nobody wants to see the Colts in the Super Bowl. I'm trying to look for an angle that gets the
do.
Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl. Can you think of
good luck with that one.
An argument for that? I would like to see. I know that can't work. I know there are reasons for that.
No, I don't think we're going to be able to turn.
But wasn't that a great game? I would just like to say that cancel the Super Bowl and that game between the Seahawks and the Packers. That was a great game. That was the Super Bowl. Forget those.
That was one of the most amazing comebacks I've ever seen. I left those guys for dead.
I walked away Seahawks
from the TV.
Fans left the stadium. They couldn't take it anymore.
5 minutes in the game, the Seahawks are behind by 2 touchdowns, and the Packers have just intercepted the ball. They have possession of the ball, and yet the Seahawks. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so
that game. Let me say one more thing about that. Is that game was set up to maximize the feeling that both teams had, both the total good feeling and bad feeling. Both teams had the maximum. Both teams got to totally experience the feeling of winning and the feeling of losing. So the Packers fans had a great time until the very end. We totally thought we had it won. We had the complete experience of victory, and then we had loss dealt to us, and the Seahawks had the reverse. So everybody got to feel that they both won and lost, and all are saved, I would just say.
That's a really non-zero-sum way of looking at it, Ian.
Yeah, I hope you like that.
Although in the end, the Packers lost. But you're right.
Yeah, don't taunt me.
You should be like my guru. That was really nicely put. And you could probably make me feel good about a lot of things.
I like to look for the good in things. And, there's always a silver lining. And
Not true, because you wrote about the movie Selma in the context of a blog post on Selma. You wrote, I dislike LBJ and regard him as a great villain. You wrote that about LBJ. I don't think you're looking too hard for the good in LBJ, Ann.
Oh, I'm reading all the Robert A. Caro books, the sequence of books about. So I'm going all the way back to the early pre-political LBJ and so forth. He's very, very interesting character. But I think there was something terribly wrong with that man. I think he was a very strange person.
What? He's a good old boy.
I don't think he can be put in a category with other people. I think he was a unique person, and a very rare person. I just don't think there's anyone else like that.
What was so weird about him? He was obsessively political, but that's what you expect in a politician.
And in a way that had no ideals in it. That was just about that. Winning wasn't a means to an end. It was the whole point. That's
most you just described most American politicians, Anne.
Well, if you want to say that he represents the type, then he's such an extreme of that type. He still is unique. Also, I remember growing up. I don't know how much older than you I am, but I remember growing up as the Vietnam War was happening and just feeling that the man was just a demon. Although one thing that he could do and that he did from an early age is both to be domineering and dominating, but also to make people feel sorry for him and to, cry and be like a complete whiner and a baby about things.
Oh, he never cried.
Oh, yeah, he sure did. Yeah. Read the Robert Caro books.
He cried on TV?
He would be a drama queen trying to get people to feel sorry for him.
If he would... If tell me something. If for him it was all about winning, he would do anything to win. Why did he choose not to run for re-election in '68? Which he might well have won, for all we know. But in any event, by dropping out, he ensured that he never win another race. And you said winning is everything to him.
Well, first of all, we're still waiting for that final volume of the Caro series. But I think
good luck with that. I don't think Caro. If you look at the rate at which Caro is progressing, we're not going to get to the end of this story. I'm afraid, unless Caro lives to be 130.
I'm sure Caro has the volume in a form that can be published and that will be finished and published. And he'll work on it until he can't work on it anymore. But I think if you look at when Johnson wanted to be president in 1960, he wouldn't run. He was holding back as if I'm just going to do my work in the Senate, and then there'll be a split convention, and then they'll come to me in the end, and then I'll agree. And he wouldn't even say that he was running. He would say that he was not running. And Caro's analysis of that is that he had such a fear of losing, of being humiliated. So that dates back to his experience with his father, who was humiliated in politics ultimately and in the end of his life. And so he had this great desire to be recognized and admired and to win, but at the same time, a morbid fear of losing, which is why he didn't put his name up until it was too late in 1960. And so I assume that what was going on behind the scenes where he decided not to run is that he was afraid of losing. And that was, but this goes back to the whining and crying. That night when he announced, were you old enough to have been watching that live on TV when it happened?
I still remember him saying, in fact, I think I told my parents
he made
I'd seen it on
pathetic,
TV, and they didn't believe it. I was about 11 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was, I guess, a few years older than that, but I remember where I was when that happened. I was in the kitchen looking at little black and white TV on the counter, and I just hated Lyndon Johnson. But when he started to say that, and when he said he wouldn't run, he was doing something that I now understand was something he used as a tool all his life, making people feel sorry for him. Even though I hated him, and I remember how he looked on that black and white TV, he looked very old and ugly at that point. I remember breaking down and crying. He really touched my heart. I now feel like a chump because I know that he was a manipulative person. I remember the exact
words. I think he said, I will not seek, nor will I accept, right? That was the nomination for... Yeah. So anyway, you haven't seen Selma, and I haven't seen Selma, so I guess we've just said all we can say about Selma, which is basically nothing relevant.
I'll tell you what I would like to say about Selma, and that is that first of all, the events behind the scenes with Johnson are distorted and for whatever dramatic reason, and they're unfair to LBJ, right? So I do think that matters. Yeah. As far as the street scenes that are so dramatic, we have film of that. We can watch documentaries about that. Why do we want to see actors reenacting that? What is that stunt about? I mean, I think it's just too much. I don't really like historical movies where they're impersonating a known character. I didn't go to see the movie Lincoln. I didn't watch Lincoln when I just ran across it on TV. And I love Daniel Day-Lewis. I just don't want to see an actor pretend to be, and basically be impersonating a historical character, especially when we have the film of these things, and we could watch that. We could, I'd rather see I generally like documentaries more anyway. But when they make a historical movie, there are all these distractions about the accuracy of it. And you could say, well, it's only a movie. But as Maureen Dowd wrote in her column I think it was last Sunday about the movie, they're handing out tickets, free tickets, to lots of school kids to go see this movie. And then that's going to become their idea of what really happened. So, why are we doing that? Why are we creating this cultural message that isn't the truth?
But isn't the truth the answer? But that's part of the answer. Is a lot of these kids are not going to watch the documentaries. They're not going to read the books unless maybe they get interested through something like a movie. I think movies have value. The reason I tend to stay away from historical fiction, well, this isn't historical fiction, but that's the trouble, is that unless I can trust it to be really, really faithful to the record, I don't like the feeling of not knowing which part is real. And apparently the director or whoever, they did make a mistake about at least one pretty clear mistake. There's apparently no evidence that he was encouraging J. Edgar Hoover to kind of torment Martin Luther King. And so that, this kind of taints it for me. But the genre, and I've heard good things about this movie otherwise. Apparently the guy who plays Martin Luther King is incredible. The genre, I would defend for exactly the reason you said. If you can get kids going to it, for most kids, this is major progress.
Okay, so you're saying
about this historical episode.
So you're saying that where there are there's important information to be learned. If kids aren't going to actually be willing to read the accurate history, it's better for them to get inaccurate history and at least get interested in it and know something about it. But then that becomes the truth. That's all they ever get. That becomes their template for what the story is. I'm more worried about disinformation than zero information. I think it would be better to know nothing than to know the wrong thing.
No, I agree. To the extent that it's inaccurate, it's worthless. I agree. And it's worse than worse. This is, in a minor way, inaccurate, and that's bad. But I'm saying the genre itself, which doesn't have to suffer from that problem, is defensible. But whatever. We haven't seen it, so I guess there's only so much.
Well, I'm not going to see it. Yeah.
Tell us about your. Yeah.
No, I was saying the only, I don't go to the movies that much. I get bored at the movies. I'd rather read. I don't like to be stuck there. So I have a whole lot of reasons. I'm basically against fans. But I did see one of the movies came out last year and that's up for the Oscars. I thought it was really great. I saw the Grand Budapest Hotel. And what I liked about that was it had like a historical setting. It was basically about the 1930s in Europe and fascism and World War II and so on, without literally being about World War II. And it was in a made-up country, Zubrowka, which actually means bison grass vodka. It's a type of Polish vodka. So they made up a fake country, and then they made up this historical story that had all this historical resonance and emotional feeling that had to do with history and with larger philosophical and moral themes and ideas about love and loss and death and so forth. So it had historicity to it, but it was all fictionalized and done with great style and humor and drama and so on. So I would much rather see a movie like that than somebody's stolid attempt to recreate history. I mean, I didn't like Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. I don't like, I didn't watch, I don't like Lincoln. I don't like any of that stuff. I think it should be fictional. Saving Private
Ryan was pretty much fiction, though. I mean, it didn't purport to be faithful. It wasn't, but
to some extent it did. You didn't know where the real history ended and the fake part began. They tried to be very accurate in the way they presented data and so forth. I thought that was supposed to look the way it really looked. And for many people now, that's the way it looked because that's the picture you have in your head.
Well, I didn't like the take-home lesson that if you show mercy to a single person, that person will come back and kill you at the end of the movie. You should kill. You have to kill everyone. Always kill everyone.
That we should have just shot him rather than taken prisoner of war. That if we apply the rules of war, we're the ones that are going to die for that. So don't show any mercy. Yeah. But also the idea that saving one particular person is a special mission that should supervene larger questions in which many lives are in danger. I just didn't understand the significance of saving that one guy because of the mother. I mean, that was a very sentimental melodramatic
Saving Private Ryan himself. No.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Oh, gee, if you could just save that one. Now, Schindler's List was a little bit similar. If we can save just these people on the list, we're doing something. We can't fix everything, but we do have this list. We can save them. But at least in that situation, the people that were being saved were not. Saving those people wasn't involved in ignoring other duties and other things that might have been done, which is what I thought the Saving Private Ryan story was. But anyway, I would much rather. There's so many movies about documentaries about World War II and about the Holocaust.
I too.
I would watch.
I prefer a good documentary, although you can, even when those are factually correct in a technical sense, you can't really, in a certain sense, trust that they're giving you the proportional truth. But, but I'm a documentary guy. I like documentaries.
I love documentaries,
So about your Scott Walker fetish, Anne, tell us about that.
Well, when Scott Walker first ran for governor in 2008, I didn't know who to vote for. I could have gone either way. And in the end, I voted for Scott Walker solely because he was against the high-speed train line between Madison and Milwaukee, taking this federal money, I think it was $800 million, to build just a train line between Madison and Milwaukee that would then ultimately end up costing us a lot of money. Once we had it, we would owe for all sorts of things. So I thought he had the right answer on one issue that I thought I understood, and I voted with him in 2008. Of course, then when he came into office, not 2008, 2010. So when he came into office in 2011, we had this, what people around here call the uprising. It was almost a revolution. We thought we were having the Egyptian spring here. It was
because he was trying to what? Remind me, he was trying to bust the public employees union, basically.
There were various reforms relating to public unions that were quite threatening to the existence of those unions. Yes.
Yeah.
So you
like him.
For the first time, I had never really thought about public unions. For the first time, I understood things about the relationship between politics and public employee unions that I would have never stopped to think about or figure out. But obviously, Franklin Roosevelt said there can't be public employee unions. There's a structural problem having public employee unions that I feel that I now understand. But anyway, it was very threatening to a lot of people who had those jobs. Including me, I lost money in that. But the previous government, we had a budget shortage that we needed to fix. And the previous governor, a Democrat, Jim Doyle, had us required to take furlough days. So there were like a couple of days a month when we weren't allowed to work. Being a professor, I guess I wasn't even allowed to read. I was supposed to not think, apparently, on 2 days.
You could just do blogging heads.
I was forbidden.
On those days you could just do blogging heads.
I was forbidden to think and read on 2 days of the month. It was crazy. I was, anyway, it was not a solution to the problems. And,
so now you want Scott Walker to be president.
So then they used the recall procedure that we have in Wisconsin to make him go up for election again in 2012. And then in 2014, his 4-year term was up, so he had to run again. So within a period of 4 years, he ran for governor 3 times. He won all of those times. As people like to say, he won in a blue state. It's a state that voted for that went for Obama in the last 2 elections, and it tends to be a blue state. A lot of people think it's a blue state, but the Republicans have the majority in both houses of the legislature now, and Walker's been elected 3 times in 4 years. And people have a good opinion of him. Some people do. Some people loathe him. I noticed that over at 538, that Nate Silver website, that there's a new podcast over there where they have 4 prognosticators, including Nate Silver. And Nate Silver gave Scott Walker the highest chance of all the possible Republican nominees of getting the Republican nomination. That was a 20% chance because it was divided up between like 10 different people. But he gave Walker the highest chance. And in that podcast, they were talking about it and saying that Walker hits the sweet spot between establishment and the Tea Party. That he actually can appeal to both sides of that. He does a good job of seeming like he cares about the social conservative matters without having that be any part of the agenda of what he's actually doing.
Now, is he among the Republican governors who refused to use federal money to expand Medicaid?
Oh yeah,
under for poor people under Obamacare.
Right, he didn't take the Medicaid expansion money. That's right.
Okay, well that leads me to another Midwestern possible presidential candidate whom I think I'd prefer to Scott Walker in that case, which is John Kasich. Is it Kasich or Kasich in Ohio?
I'm not sure.
He did, citing biblical injunctions to help the poor. He did take the Medicaid money and make life somewhat better for the poverty-stricken in his state. So I think I prefer him personally.
Do you like that when they invoke a religious basis for their policies?
Yeah, I don't object to it.
Yeah. They don't do that in France,
Yeah, you sure you want to get into that?
I'm just saying that we were going to talk about Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, I know. France is determinedly secular.
Yeah, and the idea that a politician would infuse a political statement like that with religion, or even suggest that this was a religious precept that was being put in to the policy, that would just be not just bad, but wrong.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
maybe that's why they've got a bigger problem on their hands than we have. I don't know.
Well, that's a lot of people think that the fact that we're a little more easygoing, at least some of us are, about casually bringing religion into politics, that's actually
right.
That's actually something good about America.
But I mean, remember, it's not like Kasich was insisting that some sort of biblical law apply by virtue of the fact that it's biblical.
Bob,
he was just citing a moral injunction for inspirational purposes.
But, Bob, the poor people in Wisconsin are covered. We have Badger Care in Wisconsin. We have programs here. He was objecting to the Medicare expansion. The Medicaid expansion went way beyond covering the poor and was a much greater benefits program. Extensive social safety net kind of a program. That was the whole point. It was part of the overall Obamacare agenda of getting everyone covered. And it was the reason it came out the way it did in the Supreme Court case was that it was a change in the nature of the program from one that's to help the poor to one that's to get universal coverage. And so there really is a distinction there. And even if you were following some Christian or whatever precept that you need to help the poor, I think that I never heard Scott Walker put it this way, but I think the point would be, we have the programs for the poor. This was a different program. The Medicaid expansion was a vast expansion into a much larger group of middle-class people who are not properly considered the poor.
I've got to think that he also liked the idea of poking a finger in Obama's eye and saying, we don't want your socialized medicine. He's
you'll see what he's like. He's not that kind of person. He's a very kind of modest, he's maybe too Midwestern in being sort of modest and earnest and a Boy Scout type person. You might find him sort of.
He was an Eagle Scout. He was an Eagle. Yeah, he was in fact an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
And also the son of a Baptist minister, speaking of religion and politics.
Right. And so I think he is earnest about his religion. He doesn't use it in a politicized way. I think he doesn't forefront that. I think he's actually, I would like to see someone in power who respects the limits on power and who doesn't, like LBJ, for example, get off on exercising power. It's not an emotional trip for him to exercise power. I think any politician is going to have some of that, but I think he's a pretty good example of someone who's earnest and hardworking and trying to pay attention to basically the economic matters that government is really about, and not to expand into all of these more expansive gestures of what government ought to do. It's not the big government idea. It's the small government idea. I think he's earnest about it, and I think he can express it really well. And he tends to get on message and kind of stay on it really well. I don't know if people are going to like that. There's also an issue with him that he did not finish college. He doesn't have a college degree.
So what? That's kind of appealing to some people in a way.
Yes, it is. Exactly. I'm glad you see it that way. I think he can really flip that. If people start throwing that at him too hard, it's going to get a reaction. It's going to seem snobby. And there are actually a lot of presidents who didn't have college degrees or didn't go to college. There's a pretty illustrious list of
and he did enroll in a good university, Marquette, right?
Mm-hmm,
and
Marquette.
So he didn't finish, but he absorbed some of what college is there to.
He can say, I went to college. He'll say, I went to college, and also he dropped out because he got a job and he had a family. So he can say work, family. Those are things that people identify with. And, that's a normal thing that happens.
I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah.
I don't think
that's very interesting, because that's the number one thing people say. Scott Walker, but he didn't finish college.
That's ridiculous.
Okay,
that's ridiculous.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm sure that Scott Walker will be glad to hear you say that. I'm interested in seeing how that plays out in public when he's challenged on that point. I think maybe people will be afraid to throw that at him, because most Americans haven't finished college. Or close to it.
How long did he go to college? 1 year, 2 years?
I think he's like a semester short or something like that. I'm not positive.
It was how much?
Maybe a semester short. So he didn't get all the credits he needed. He took
a semester short. Oh, geez. What's the diff?
Yeah, this goes back to the whole football question of what about the rules? Shouldn't we live up to the very letter of the rules? How much of a stickler are we going to be about, did you get your degree? Because the degree is the main thing.
If he was claiming to have a degree, it would be one thing. I mean, if there is a history of him kind of acting, saying things in a way that suggests he's got a degree, then when he doesn't, that's a different thing. But just not going to college.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
So,
well, what do you think of the idea that a guy from that Americans don't really get the Midwestern style, and they're not, they rejected Pawlenty and so forth. And when's the last time a Midwesterner got to be president, other than Gerald Ford, who was never elected president? The Midwestern style maybe seems bland or dull to.
Well, I think. Actually, it can be very appealing. I mean, first of all, remember, for a long time, it was the standard kind of network anchorman persona. It seemed to appeal to the nation then. Johnny Carson was Midwestern, and David Letterman was there's a history of these big television personalities that people, invest a lot of trust and credulity in being actually Midwestern. I think it can be a very successful kind of identity. And I think John Kasich is a good example. To be honest, I'm not sure I've seen Scott Walker talk on TV, so I have no impression of him. But Kasich is an example of a guy, and I don't know if it's Kasich or Kasich, but who strikes me as authentic. It's an effective Midwestern persona. I think, and I also think he's somebody who genuinely does think about policy seriously. At any rate, I think he conveys that. I don't think there's any reason. I would think, if anything, a Midwesterner has an advantage. I think people with more distinctive accents, East Coast Southern, they may have specific constituencies they alienate with those accents, whereas I think Midwesterners, you just don't notice.
Yeah. I think Clinton's Southern accent helped him.
Well, I think it helps a Democrat in a way more than it helps a Republican, because it helps you cross over.
Well, I think a heavy Southern accent, I think if you talk like Lindsey Graham, I think it's very hard to get Americans to accept you as the president.
Well, if you're a Republican, it's hard to pick up. It makes it harder to pick up additional support on the other side of the line. So, so in a general election, nationwide general election, I think a Southern accent's a bigger asset for a Democrat than for a Republican.
But Midwest
doesn't cross over to win the election.
Midwest isn't just an accent; it's also a whole demeanor and a kind of a smallness and a modesty that I think could be. It could be good branding if you figure out how to do it, because I think people maybe are looking for someone who will be more modest and have an idea of smaller, limited government. Rand Paul is always expressing this idea of limited government, but he's doing it in a way that seems more, kind of more exciting, maybe too exciting. So I don't know how that's going to play. I think it'd be interesting to hear those two characters talking.
Wait, you said Rand Paul?
Rand Paul.
I think the thing about Rand Paul, dirty little secret about Rand Paul, I don't think he's very smart. I think his father is significantly smarter than he is.
You don't think he's smart, but he went to medical school. Had to be smart enough to take medical school. Oh, my God. He went to medical school. Yeah. Well, people will say that they don't think Scott Walker's that smart, probably.
Well, I don't know what I'd say about him. I think Kasich is pretty smart. But the last thing I'd say about the Midwestern persona is, there is a yearning for authenticity. Supposedly, the reason people like Chris Christie is because he sounds like he's telling it like it is, without regard for political consequences, which is, of course, is total nonsense in his case. But I think, Midwesterners can come across as authentic in a different way than Christie does, but in a way, and it has to do partly with the humility you're talking about.
Yeah. Is that what we want? Is that going to work in the debates? I mean, I think maybe Christie is too broad, and I don't mean fat. Christie is too dramatic, and he's too flashy. I think that seems a little scary, especially once you get the sort of whiff of possible corruption or bad actions in there. That's enough to kind of wreck his candidacy.
Yeah,
and then just the idea that he doesn't seem authentically conservative. And I think a lot of people would like someone who seems solidly mainstream, but also dedicated to conservative values, which I think should just be the economic side of the conservative values and don't talk about the social issues. I think Scott Walker has done a good job with not getting mixed up in the social issues. Like, for example, when the court case came out about same-sex marriage, which he'd been opposed to, he basically said it's over now. The courts have decided we need to do other things. We need to get back to the business of the government. And I thought that was good. I think a lot of Republicans would do better if they had just said, this has been resolved and we need to talk about it.
Now, I think with Christie, I think questions remain about Bridgegate. I think his New Jersey approval rating is very low. He can't even make the case right now that the people in New Jersey like him.
Yeah, but New Jersey's a blue state. Why should people in New Jersey like a good?
But his whole claim to fame. Remember what may have gotten him in trouble in Bridgegate is his insistence that he be able to say, in New Jersey, I've crossed over. Democrats love me. Republicans love me. That apparently is why he wanted the Democratic mayor in Fort Lee to endorse him, and allegedly, Bridgegate was payback for the failure to endorse. But in any event, he very much wanted to be able to say, I cross over in New Jersey, and he can't say that right now. And by the way, wants to say that, I wouldn't recommend that he do what he did. The only good thing about the Cowboys losing, from my point of view, is that I won't have to see for another week Chris Christie in the skybox with Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, right? And a weird thing is that he did that. He sat with Jerry Jones even when they were playing the Eagles in an important game near the end of the season, the Philadelphia Eagles, and they have a big following in South Jersey. So that was really like consorting with the enemy from the point of view of a lot of voters.
Right, and he was up there, so he wasn't rooting for his own team. He's up there in the owner's box or whatever it is, so that seems elitist. And then he's hugging and jumping around in his red sweater or whatever.
and
meanwhile,
failing, and
Scott Walker was down in Green Bay. He was in the stands. He was next to people who were wearing the cheese heads and the Packer wear and so forth. So he was being a man of the people.
Good point. And then when Christie tried and failed to get Jerry Jones to give him a high five at that key moment. Have you seen that little film?
No.
Totally embarrassing. It's like, it's as if, Jerry Jones isn't actually dissing him, but it really looks like it, because Jerry Jones just turned to hug somebody else. And Christie puts his hands up for a high five, and Jerry Jones turns away, and Christie looks
and there's probably little GIFs of that where people watch it loop over and over. Yeah, that's funny. There's one. You ever see the old one about with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton is going to kiss her, and then she kind of turns to Obama and kisses Obama, and Bill's left there with his kiss unconsummated. That's a very fun
I would love to see that. I haven't seen
that. Never gets old.
And I have to ask you, since you are a lawyer, about the famous podcast Serial, which I think we both listened to.
Yes. I listened to every episode twice.
Really?
Well, because there's a lot in it. There's so much detail to it, and it's a very well-told story. I love podcasts. I love this radio story. I love listening in real time to someone who is enacting, whether truly or falsely, enacting the process of thinking through something. And so it's very, it's fascinating to be invited into the mind of Sarah Koenig, where she's going through things one by one and looking at them very carefully. Now, maybe that's a hammy performance that's all on this, defense lawyer agenda of trying to get someone out of prison, which is, I think sort of the template of the show.
Do you think Sarah Koenig is being sincere? Do you think she authentically represents her own view of it, which is, hey, I kind of, on balance, probably think he didn't do it? Or do you think that's kind of what she had to say at the end to justify resurrecting this case in the first place?
Well, so I think that she always had a self-interest, whether she consciously overcame it or hid it or acknowledged it. It was always the case that the show was worth doing because we were made to think that he's falsely imprisoned, that he's either innocent or they didn't treat him the right way and he wasn't properly convicted. And remember, in the end, she doesn't say she thinks he's innocent. She just says that she would have acquitted him on the evidence if she were on the jury. So she doesn't think
that was my reading of it.
Right.
That was my reading of it. That
but
she,
I don't think
she, but
I don't think she ever presented the prosecutor's side fairly. Intercept, the Glenn Greenwald website, Intercept has an interview with the prosecutor, and he says some things that were never in the podcast, and he talks about how little effort was made to get him to participate, although he says he wouldn't have participated because he wouldn't want to put the victim's family through that again. And is that really the right role for a prosecutor to go on a show like that and explain it? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, there was an important thing that I didn't think was ever talked about in the podcast, which was that the lawyer who's dead and ended up getting treated pretty roughly, but the lawyer said that she had, that Gutierrez, Adnan Syed's lawyer, that who's now dead, and that she sent the prosecution a disclosure of about 80 names, saying these were witnesses that were going to testify that Syed was at the mosque because it was Ramadan. He was praying all evening, and that's where he was. So that was going to be the big alibi defense. He was at the mosque, and they had 80 people who were going to be witnesses. But then when they found out about the cell phone records and how it showed that he was all of these other places, it couldn't possibly have been true. And Gutierrez couldn't have put those people on. But she had sent a disclosure that she had 80 names of people who were going to say that they saw him there that night. Now, that wasn't in the podcast. I just think some of the stuff that a lot of time was spent on, like the DNA evidence, I think kind of went nowhere. And to me,
there was no DNA evidence, right?
Well, there was some DNA evidence that wasn't tested, but what would it have shown? Obviously, there was an idea that there was a serial murderer somewhere in the area, and if his DNA had showed up in that DNA evidence, then that would be hugely important. But
well, they are gonna do testing now on the evidence kit, but I think it's unlikely that there would be anything there from the killer.
But what bothered me the most about the way the evidence was presented, other than that 80 names of people testifying about him being in the mosque, and the overall idea that it was clearly in the structure of the podcast that we had to think, oh, maybe he's innocent, and be on tenterhooks about that and get excited about that. That to just say, there was a trial, he was convicted, this was the evidence, here's how it fit together, that would have made a very dull podcast. But in the end, I think that when you have the various pieces of evidence, you don't just look at them one by one and say, this might mean that, but it could mean something else. I have a reasonable doubt about that. You put everything together, and then the reasonable doubt has to do with whether all of that evidence put together. So if you have things that show only a probability or a chance that something's true, if you take them in isolation, they're not enough to convict, but you put enough of them together, and it becomes a very persuasive pattern. And that idea, which is basic logic, was never explained. They never got an expert to talk about Bayes' theorem or anything like that. That has to do with how you put evidence together. And so I thought it was very either deliberately naive or unintentionally naive or just very slanted toward the defense. No, there
was some Bayesian analysis implicit in something that was said in the final podcast. She gets her assistant, whose name is, I think, Dana.
That's as close as they come.
There are a couple of times where she gets Dana plays the role of voicing doubts about Adnan's innocence that I suspect were actually kind of held by Sarah herself, but she didn't want to be the one.
Maybe, but I think that they should have gotten a much stronger person than Dana, someone who was much more in the prosecutorial mode. We heard so much from the Innocence Project lawyer. They should have had someone who could really explain the logic of evidence and how these things are put together. And they also should have had someone to explain how, when you have a witness like Jay, and there was an interview at The Intercept with Jay, by the way, which is worth reading. When you have, and Ulrich, the prosecutor, talked about this. When you have a witness in a criminal case, you have someone that's a criminal accomplice. This person has to be your witness because he's the person that knows things. And he is going to lie and get some things wrong and have some incoherencies. But you have to work with that. That's the way criminal trials are all the time. Why didn't we ever hear from an expert who explained that kind of thing from the prosecutorial perspective? That perspective was never strongly presented. And to say that Dana did something like that, I don't think that that's enough. I think that it was never really pulled together with the way a prosecutor would have pulled it together. But Dana did. Listen,
in defense of them, Anne, Dana did say in the final podcast, look, the reason I think Adnan did it is because if he didn't do it, he had to have a very, very unlucky day. What are the chances? What are the chances that his cell phone, it pings the tower from the place she was buried and blah, 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 blah. That's basically implicitly a way of saying that if you just do a formal probabilistic analysis, the chances are super high that he did it. And I agree with that. I think he did it. Right. I think Jay may have been more. I think Jay may have been more complicit than he was letting on. And I think that accounts for some of his lies. I think Jay may have participated in the murder itself, but I think Adnan pretty close to definitely did.
Yeah, and
how about you, Anne?
I think he did it. That was my working theory from the beginning. I always, people were impressed by the recordings of the conversations with him, but I always thought he sounded dishonest. I always thought Adnan sounded like he was lying. Way. I didn't find him.
I thought he sounded like like he could be a pretty smooth liar, or he could be telling the truth. I didn't really get much out of it, except a few times where he was caught short and didn't have a good answer.
Yeah, I felt he sounded dishonest to me. But I mean, maybe I lean toward thinking that, and I'd like to think that trials get things right and that the rights of defendants are protected. I mean, the cases do get resolved, and we need to be able to go forward and think these were properly done. Now, maybe some people really should be pardoned, or some cases do need to be reopened, and there need to be mechanisms for doing that. But this idea that we should just doubt everything and think that there are all these people in prison who have been subjected to misjustice in the United States of America, I think that's a terrible, cynical thing to get out there and to plant in people's minds. Well, we were talking with respect to LBJ about how the movie Selma, puts things into people's minds that is deceptive or is inaccurate. And I think the podcast is another example of that. It was very entertaining media, very interesting. There was a lot about law in it up to a point. But look what it did to people's minds. I think it left people thinking, things aren't being done fairly. Innocent people are in prison. Well, trials just don't work right. And, there are all these perplexities. And whenever someone presents evidence, there are all these mysteries behind it, that had a big effect on people. And I think that the argument that he was guilty ought to have been presented by experts who were at the best at being able to present that side of it, and then face up to that and deal with that. Because, there was a lot that we heard from the Innocence Project lawyer. That person got so much play in the podcast. And
she sounded to me kind of flaky. I mean, I wouldn't trust her analysis of anything. This is Deirdre, the Innocence Project woman.
She was very enthusiastic. The Innocence Project
has done a lot of good work, and they have a lot of people. But she was just so determinedly partisan, it seemed to me. And maybe that's her job. It's fine. I mean, the way the legal system works is the prosecutor's determinedly partisan, and so is the defense attorney. Okay, and the idea is,
So balance it with someone who's equivalently dogged from the prosecutorial side. Someone that puts it together as best as it can be put together.
I get the way it's supposed to work. I do think there were definitely, I think there are questions raised about how the prosecution was conducted. Certainly questions raised about how the defense was conducted. And I think it's good, if prosecutors, there should be transparency. And maybe it should be accompanied by education, as you say, about what is realistic to expect when you've got an accomplice testifying. Yeah. But here's a question I have for you, which is, like I said, I think with a high degree of confidence, Adnan was involved in the murder. Maybe Jay was too, but Adnan was. But I'm still not sure how I should vote if I'm on the jury. And so I have this question for you about the kind of the reasonable doubt. It's not about the reasonable doubt standard per se, but here's the question. Suppose, and this is kind of what happens to me with this case, I think, although I didn't see the case actually presented in court.
Right, you had the idea. You sort of feel like you saw the trial, but you didn't. I mean, Jay was on the stand for 5 days. You didn't hear the prosecution's summary. There was a lot there that the jury saw, but we kind of had the feeling that we saw the trial, but we didn't.
Okay, but here's my question. If you think that on the one hand, the prosecutor's argument as constructed fails, for example, the prosecutor says, Jay's an important witness, and you should believe him when he says X and Y and Z, but you really don't believe him, and you don't think you'd trust anything Jay says, which is my position, and yet you see pieces of evidence in the thing that you would have constructed in a different rhetorical frame, maybe from the one the prosecutor used, right? That you think collectively are compelling on the side of a guilty verdict. In that case, should the juror vote to convict? In other words, the prosecutor's narrative per se is not compelling, but there is compelling evidence to be found in the cases you've seen it. Should you vote to convict or not? I don't know what the answer is. You should?
You don't go by the prosecutor's template and how well that fit on the evidence. You go by the jury instructions that come from the judge that are based on the law. So you have certain specific elements that you need to find proved. And that's the question to be answered, whether it fits into the legal requirements and the burdens of proof that are imposed on the prosecution. And then you have instruction on what the burden of proof means and so on. So you go by what the judge tells you to do.
Okay, so basically,
you might think there's one witness that I just think he was a complete liar. I think he made everything up. I'm going to discount everything that he says. The burden has to be met without that included. You could do that.
Which I think is what happens in this case. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's kind of hovering around the reasonable doubt threshold. I'm not sure I would have voted to convict. I just think I believe that there's more than a 90% chance that Adnan did it.
And of course, once there is a conviction, once a jury has decided, it's no longer, well, would I have convicted if I were on the jury? It then becomes the question of whether a reasonable juror could find truth beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's could find the case proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
So so you could say a reasonable person could have found him guilty, but I don't think I would have found him guilty. Well, we know that they sat through the trial and they found him guilty. And so are we going to say they were not reasonable to have thought that there was no reasonable doubt?
Mm-hmm.
And that's once it's decided, that's the way we ought to look at it. I mean, if there's new evidence, that might make a difference.
Yeah. I sat on a case once, and then I didn't learn until it was time to deliberate that I had been an alternate, and I was dismissed.
And they threw you out.
It was like a 2-week high school stabbing case.
Uh-huh. And you didn't know you were an alternate?
No, I didn't. So I was paying very close attention, and I was really annoyed when I was let go because I wanted to be in on it. But I would have voted to convict, and they voted to acquit right away. And I understood why. It was a horribly presented case. Mm-hmm. But I felt I saw the evidence. And that was a case where I think, in effect, you had that distinction between a successfully constructed narrative by the prosecutor, which there really hadn't been, and sufficient evidence to convict. But anyway. So, and we're at the 1 hour mark.
All right.
We owe it to America to cease and desist.
Okay. Well, it was nice talking
to
you.
But, it was. And, I'm holding my Tom Brady football, inflated to Tom's standards. And
I don't have any props.
And we'll see what happens in the Super Bowl. But all right-thinking people at this point have to be supporting the Seahawks, right? Now that we know the Patriots are filthy cheaters.
Yeah. Oh, they were so heroic in their game, even without the cheating scandal. I think I switched over to the Seahawks. And Russell Wilson,
even though they beat your team, the Packers.
Yeah, but
even though they beat your team, the Packers, but because they did it with such flair, you're now. Also,
it's better if the best team is the one that beat us. But also, Russell Wilson, the quarterback for the Seahawks, was a Badger he was a quarterback here at the University of Wisconsin, so we kind of feel he's our guy too.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, he's likable.
Yep. Yeah. Very good.
So, like in high school, were you the type of girl, like if some guy beat up your boyfriend, then you had a crush on the guy who beat up your boyfriend? I mean, I don't want to overextend this analogy between the Seahawks beating the Packers.
It's a game. It's not a crime. It's a game.
Okay, never mind.
And so you say,
I'm sorry.
May the best team win. And when you lose, the other team was better that day, and you like your team. But if your team was beaten by a bad team or an unworthy team, that would be more painful than by saying my team was beaten by a great team.
So that's it. Okay, that's one reaction. Yeah, it would have taken a great team to beat your great team, sure.
So do you acknowledge then, Bob, that I've been the voice of reason today? You seem to be acknowledging repeatedly that I'm the voice of reason today. So
you've been uncharacteristically rational, and I want to congratulate you on that.
It's the Midwest vibe. It's the Wisconsin magic.
Yeah, the humility is effective too.
Oh, I'm not really from Wisconsin.
No, I know.
I just
from
live
Brooklyn,
here.
Right?
I'm just hiding out here for the last 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. I know the real Ann is from Brooklyn. And it shows.
No.
You're not? Where are you from?
You don't know where I'm from?
Where are you from?
Delaware.
Delaware?
Mm-hmm.
No wonder you don't talk about it much. That's a pretty nondescript place to be from. Unless you're a DuPont. You're not a DuPont, right?
What about Joe Biden? Joe Biden isn't even from Delaware.
Mm.
Well,
no, I've never heard anybody brag about being from Delaware, I got to say.
It's kind of nondescript. It's small. Some people think it's the South. Some people think it's not the South. It's on the line. What?
It's just an Amtrak stop.
Do you think Delaware is the South?
No, not at all. It's America's corporate headquarters. It's, it's got all these corporations incorporated there.
What I've been told is if you ask black people, they'll say it's the South. And so any black person will say it's the South. So that's what I've heard. I've been corrected on that point. What?
Even Maryland isn't technically the South.
Well, maybe you're not asking enough. Maybe you have too much. You don't have enough racial diversity in your question, in the pool of people you're questioning. On that subject.
Okay, I will work on that. And with that instruction, I thank you, Anne, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.